Now, then I'll go to Goult to take over. Now, can we take the speakers on this agenda, please? Can we begin with Mr. Dixon?
Does this bend? Pull it.
Just press the button.
Right. You tell it where to go.
Yeah. Thank you.
The Council uses fine words to introduce the public participation rights section of its constitution. It says it wants to encourage and actively support people getting involved in meeting its aspirations. True to these words, the Council allocates 15 minutes at each full Council meeting for the public to speak, each speaker having 3 minutes. That's 5 people allowed to speak as a right. The Democracy and Standards Committee, as you know, does the same. Why then is it different with planning committee meetings? Why are only 2 members of the public permitted to speak as a right? Most planning meetings, of course, involve more than one application, and applicants and local councillors are also entitled to speak. I'm aware that some councillors are concerned that allowing more than one third-party speaker for and against each application could make these meetings too long. However, I'm afraid the facts don't support that concern. I've analysed the minutes of every planning committee meeting since 1st June last year. The average length of each minuted meeting was as follows: Kettering 59 minutes, Wylie 59 minutes, Corby an hour and 3 minutes, Strategic an hour and 5, Thrapston 2 hours 18 minutes. Excluding Thrapston, planning meetings are lasting about an hour. An hour is not very long. More to the point, there is clearly scope for these meetings to be a little longer. I urge you to grasp the nettle and recommend that 15 minutes, rather than the current 6 minutes, be allowed as a right for third-party speakers on each planning application. How would that affect the length of the average planning meeting? The answer is not much. In the 26 planning committee meetings held since 1st June, only 27 third-party objectives and just 2 supporters spoke on the 105 applications which were considered. That's an average of 1 third-party speaker per meeting, or 1 speaker every 4 applications. These figures suggest that the average committee agenda has 1, and certainly no more than 2, contentious applications on it. If 15 minutes were to be allocated for third-party speakers on each of 2 contentious applications at a particular meeting, the meeting would still only be extended by a maximum of 18 minutes. I can understand members of the Thrapston Area Committee not welcoming the change I'm advocating. Their meetings are already too long because of the excessive number of applications on each agenda. But that is a separate issue, which must be separately resolved. In the meantime, it shouldn't be allowed to prejudice the public's right to have a better say at planning meetings across our area as a whole.
Mr. Dixon,
without
time is now finished.
Without having to rely on the chair's discretion.
Thank you. May I ask that we go to the next speaker, please? Start.
I'm here because I want you to acknowledge that in the rare event that a planning matter attracts multiple people who wish to speak, the best course of action is that they are permitted, within defined parameters, to do so. Leaving the ability to speak or not speak at a planning meeting at the chair's discretion did not work and does not work. Giving the chair discretion is in effect to give that person absolute power and authority over who is allowed to speak or who remains unheard. I am a recipient of a full apology from North Northants Council due to my right to speak at the I.M. Kelly application being so poorly handled. The key causes of that maladministration were the chair refusing to use their discretion when more than one person wanted to speak, combined with accidental council staff mistakes. I would urge this committee to rewrite section 2.5 of the procedure for speaking at a planning committee. Presently it reads, where there is significant demand for public speaking on a proposal, more than one speaker for and against the proposal may be permitted, but this will only be at the discretion of the committee chair. I would urge you to rewrite this to where there is significant demand for public speaking on a proposal, more than one speaker for and against the proposal will be permitted. This will be as per defined guidelines in Appendix A. Ergo, I would urge you to update Appendix A to remove Chair's discretion and instead properly list out how many and for how long people may speak, bringing it into line with all your other meetings. Anything else is a nonsense and leaving planning matters to the potential whim and fancy of one person. A simple guide might be, say, 3 minutes per speaker, no more than, as Robert said earlier, I think it's 5 speakers on one proposal. By adding just over 15 minutes to a planning session in extreme and unusual circumstances, as already demonstrated by the numbers that Mr. Dixon has spoken about, you will have taken out ambiguity, caprice and personal impulse. I urge you to change the planning numbers of speakers to match the rest of the council meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, shall we hand over to the next debate?
Thank you, Chair. I'm here to present the report which results from discussions that were had at the last Constitutional Working Group meeting. As members will be aware, there was debate last year at full council relating to a number of planning-related issues, and what this report covers is a couple of them together with a third recommendation. My intention, Chair, will be to split the presentation in terms of Appendix A and B. So, in relation to Appendix A, this relates obviously to the discussions of the group relating to the public participation policy, which the members of the public have just commented on. The group did consider this matter and did note the discussions that were had at full council last year when this came up as a motion. After consideration, the group decided to recommend to this committee that there were some minor, if you like, amendments, but fundamentally the policy as currently written was one that they wished to currently adhere to. The one thing that was welcomed by the group was the guidance of chairs of planning committees. As has been referred to, obviously chairs of planning committees do have discretion to expand the public participation segment of a planning meeting, which is chair's discretion. And I should just point out, chair either has discretion or he doesn't have discretion. And really, you know, it is a matter for this committee to decide whether it wishes to recommend to full council that that discretion remains, or whether you wish to have a alternative scheme introduced to supplement what we have written in front of us today. I think the arguments for and against this are well rehearsed, so I won't say any more on this segment of the report, Chair, and I'll hand over through you to members.
That's great. Now, shall we begin the debate? Would anyone like to open? Councillor Watts.
Well, speaking as a chair of Corby area planning, it is difficult to know the number of speakers in a sense because it's only a day before. We have our chair's brief 2 days before, and we don't really know if anybody is going to come and speak. We usually know the applicants, but we don't really know, don't always know the number of objectors that 2 minutes each for the 3 objectors. So that we use that discretion. And I am very keen that people do get the opportunity to speak, because planning is a very emotive subject. It feels very personal when a plan, development is close to you. It feels very, very personal and may affect you. So I'm keen that people can speak, but what doesn't help objectors is repetition and non-material matters. I feel, all of the objectors that register, their information is appraised in the planning application anyway and can be read. So that information, the material objections are presented to members of the planning committee and are read in the report. And in one sense, there's nothing further to be added from a speaker other than perhaps emotion. But speakers need to keep on to the material information that would influence members making decisions and whether they would agree with the objector. So I think the value in a speaker is the accuracy of the material objections, and perhaps not that there's 5 speakers saying all the same things, but it is really the content of, and that content can be expressed within 3 minutes. So and as I've said, it's chair's discretion to expand that time. And if it was a very emotive and public interest application, I would be very happy and definitely would expand the time or the number of speakers who wish to speak. But it would have to be the quality of the objection that has more impact than the quantity of the objectors. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. I think you summarised quite well our core members' personal nature of the plan applications have, and I think each and every one of us receive emails, and we also get a lot of it in the local vicinity. So there is a lot of personal attachment to that. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking also as a Vice Chair of the Area Planning Committee in Rushden. And previously I was Vice Chair of that for many years under East Northants, and was also on the County Council Planning Committee. Certainly we haven't really had that many contentious items at Rushden at the moment, but when we did under East Northants, I always advocated having extra speakers. That's not to say we should necessarily change the constitution to do that, but personally, if I was using my discretion, I would allow it. So, as Councillor Watts very, adequately sort of summed it up, it's not, it's very emotive. It's also quite useful for the planning committee to hear. Not just to hear the speaker, but to be able to ask them questions as well. Sometimes that's the applicant, because they've got some technical knowledge, but certainly at the County Council that was allowed, and that's been put into the Constitution, so I think that's really, really worthwhile. Obviously on matters of clarification only, but that is really useful if there is a problem. The problem with extending it, and this is what I said at full council, is if you make it across the board that you've always got 5 speakers, that can get out of hand if you've got a long agenda. I can understand the contentious items, that's quite separate, but I've just got this nervousness that if you say you've got to put it down in writing, you've got to say you can have 5 speakers, because we also all have the applicant, we have the board members, we have the parish council, town council rep as well. So it's not just these 2, and quite often the parish or town council rep will have gathered lots of information, and the ward members would have gathered information from lots of other people and would have summarised it as well. So you get feedback from more than just, you know, the one person falling in. So it's just a bit sort of just a blanket change. That's why we favoured having chair's discussion, and I understand when that doesn't work, when that causes problems. I personally would have agreed to it. Just technical point, 2.6, there are 3 ward members. How can we divide the 50-50? Perhaps we could reword that.
Chair, I will reword that to just read divided.
Councillor Watt.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate the comment that Councillor Mercer made about the points of clarification. I am very guilty of allowing points of clarification to extend, as Paul will attest to. Sometimes they do become a bit of a conversation, they shouldn't do, but because it should be points of clarification. But the points of clarification are also there for members to further ask the objector or applicant to expand on an issue that they may feel is important for them to know on. So it's not just for 3 minutes. And I have been known to forget to stop the stopwatch as well, so I shouldn't say that.
I knew that.
Yes. You were saying that you don't have public speakers have like answering clarification points. Generally, do you?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was more for the planning.
In my experience, I have noticed points of clarification being quite handy to them on the policy, and you know, of course, Councillor Watt has shared his experience with that.
Yeah, just through the chair. When I think the planning committee, area planning committee started, there were some inconsistencies around the area committees, because obviously people were coming from what they did pre-vesting day in Kettering, in Corby, etc. So what we've attempted to ensure is that there's some sort of standardisation. So on the points of clarification, a speaker would come up, they'd say their 3 minutes, whether they're an objector or an applicant or town parish councillor, whatever. And then the chair would normally give the members of the committee the opportunity to ask the speaker to clarify something they've said. As Councillor Watt said, sometimes you have to be very careful it doesn't turn into a debate, that you don't get new points coming in that aren't necessarily totally relevant, etc., etc. So the chair has to sort of tightly control that. But the idea is that the speaker may have said something, a member of the committee will think, oh, right, what do they exactly mean by that, or what did that refer to? And that gives them the opportunity to clarify that point. And when all the clarification points are dealt with, then the speaker would withdraw back to the public gallery. So that's the way the system should work, and normally does most of the time.
That's it. I think you know we as a committee have done quite a lot of work with obviously one of Rock Harbour and getting planning programs through. And I do think you know, it is important to get that sort of same level of standard throughout the whole of the plans. Councillor Buckingham?
Were you first? Thank you. I know and understand, having followed the planning for a long time, it's an area of interest, that people can feel aggrieved if they don't have their say. What I would like to see put in place is, you know, you've got a scheme of petitions, so that if you have so many signatures on a petition, you have, it sort of goes, so if you have 500, you can take it to the petition to a committee. If there's 1,000, you can have. So where you've got contentious planning, could you not have, say, for example, if you have objectives that are an assigned petition, or there are over 100, or if there are, so that you have consistency as the contentiousness grows, so that people feel that, you know, and it doesn't have to be 10 people, it can be 5 people, it's just that extra, so that you are looking at the thing as a whole rather than, you know, it's not just not appendix, what we call it, annex, or, you know, putting on an extra room, but when you're looking at things like that have a big impact on the community, and the community feel very strongly against it, then they have, but I would also want there to be more more information for people who object, so that they know that it's got to be, I know they should know that it's got to follow planning concerns, but at the same time you do get that little bit extra, but not if they're going to duplicate some of the things that, so they still get a say on more of the say, but otherwise, you know, you're going to get the same problems again and again in terms of people coming in and wanting to, feeling aggrieved, and that feeling of, you know, and I know it shouldn't happen within, but these are things that people feel very strongly against.
And,
Thank you.
Thank you. But one of the things you mentioned about the petitions, you know, we currently do have a system where if a petition receives between 5 and 749 signatories, it will be, I believe it's a response from an officer. An officer goes to debate in committee, and then it is about 1,500 till then in full council. And you know, petitions are a great way of bringing communities together and making sure that the big issues are highlighted. That's why we have that system in place.
Chair, can I come in there? Because I wouldn't want people to go away without some qualification. Full council cannot decide planning applications. That is delegated purely and simply to the planning committee. So whether a petition may exceed 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 signatures, the response of full council would be refer it to the planning committee without debate. So whilst the petition scheme is useful for, I would say, a lot of items, I would be very careful. I mean, people can organise and put in petitions as part of the public consultation process, and I'm sure they do, for planning. And those go straight to planning. So I wouldn't want people to walk away from here thinking that there was some sort of other route. No, quite simply, it is the planning committee's responsibility under the law.
And that's not what I'm saying here.
Right, I apologise, Councillor, if I kept you up incorrectly, but you mentioned the petition scheme.
Yeah.
So I thought I wanted to put that qualification in. I'm sure you did. I'm
trying to make a point, I'm making it really badly, and I do apologise for that. But what I'm saying is that like the scheme of petition, it grows, it has a way of doing different things as the amount of objectives or whatever come up. So it's having those layers. I hope I've got that over it.
Yeah, no, you have this. Thank you. Councillor Fedovich.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've just got a few points to come back on. So, I mean, I think taking a real step back from this, the big thing I see that we're just constantly discussing is the issue of time. This is all about time. This is, we're talking about minutes here in quite often the case. And I do appreciate that there's a very, very good point about clarification and that things might go on and things like that. And like I say, for perhaps I know it's more difficult there. But I think like our speaker said tonight, that possibly is a separate issue. If we're packing out agendas, I don't think it's a case of time we're allocating to public speakers and sort of allowing them their democracy and chance to speak versus things running over. And I just don't think that that's a very fair way of looking at things when effectively we're here to look after people, we're here to give people a voice and make sure that they feel heard, even if not necessarily the things they bring forward aren't particularly relevant. Sometimes there might be a little bit of that, but I think Lynn has a fantastic point about making sure that we give speakers who are coming, make sure that they know what sort of comments would be particularly relevant. Offering that advice would be probably a very good way around that. I do get that it can run over, but we know that planning is an emotive subject for our residents, and we know that they need to feel heard, and often if they have that opportunity, they might be a little bit more understanding whichever way that application, whichever way it goes. So I know you sort of also mentioned about the fact that emotion is kind of bad in a way because it's something that, like, emotion isn't obviously something that we can take into account when we're making decisions at planning committees, but also we have to recognise, and you've also said that emotion is important to people, and giving people that option, that is us as a council showing that we are open, showing that they have that opportunity. And I think the statistics as well that we've seen and what we've heard this evening about the fact that 1 in 4 applications are actually receiving speakers. We're not talking about that many applications. This isn't going to affect that many. And I think the show what this would show if we put, for instance, increase it to 2 speakers for and against, or whether we make it 3, I think just showing that we're a bit more flexible there would be show that we're more transparent, which is kind of what we're talking about here. The big thing I have a problem with, sorry, I'll not be in a minute, is the chair's discretion, because we've seen it not work. We've seen it not work. And I very much appreciate that a lot of chairs would be very, very good, and they would allow it. If there were sort of lots of people who wanted to speak, they would allow it, but it's not really about who is sitting in the chair's position. It's about the fact that it rests on one person's shoulders, and sort of about the whole idea of impulse, for instance, or just not being, it puts it on one person's shoulders, which it shouldn't be, and that's not fair on that one person as well. So I think the key thing really is for us is that, and my residents as well, is making sure that there's some defined features, so that when they want to speak on a planning application, that there's, especially when we're talking about contentious planning applications, there should be a clear tipping point. It shouldn't be something that the chair has to define. There shouldn't be any haze. There shouldn't be doubt of democracy. It should be clear. So, I mean, for instance, one sort of suggestion could be if there are 5 or more than 3 people who are planning, who apply to speak, we allow 3. Like that could just be a very clear-cut thing. There's clearly the demand to speak on this application, and please allow it. And we just have that defined. That could be to do with like the amount of comments or however we want to do that, but I think it has to be defined. It can't just be down to one person. So that's where I sort of am with it all. But we have a duty to our constituents to make sure that they have a voice, and we know that planning is so contentious for them. So sort of like we're saying, it should be in line, at least with other applications, or have something very clear to make sure that they don't lose out.
Thank you very much. Pass over to Councillor Watts.
Thank you. You mentioned flexibility. In the document, it does say flexibility, chair's discretion. And I come back to this point of the information that is passed over in that 3 minutes. There's like a defined number of things that you can object upon, material things you can object upon, and you can express them in that 3 minutes. saying a motive is good, are we to take more concern over a speaker who sits there and cries for 3 minutes? Or a speaker that it sticks to the real material information that is important and affects the application. And in my experience on planning, the number of people in the public gallery can have a bigger effect upon members of impression of importance to the community than just 5 speakers instead of 1 speaker. But say, what I was concerned about on this matter is, if somebody's registered to speak, and I've expressed this in the chair's meeting, if somebody does register to speak and it's first come, first served, and they actually don't turn up on the day, and the others who've registered to speak have been told, no, you haven't made it, can we communicate? Can we still encourage them to come along? Because, you know, in a sense, you want a substitute. And at that point in time, chair's discretion could take place because they have registered to speak, and the primary speaker hasn't turned up. They can then take their place. And the other concern I had was the quality of the presentation, objection. The first person who was submitted may not have all right material points. The second person may have better material points. I wondered if we could encourage objectors to get together. And I think it says in here to pool their resources, because as I say, it is the quality of the objection that is going to make an impact on members rather than the quantity of the objectors.
Now we'll go to Councillor Mercer and Councillor.
Thank you. I think the significant thing in the Appendix A is the first one. The application has generated a significant number of third-party objections relating to material planning considerations, and you could argue what is significant, but I think we would all know when it's significant, if it's 10, 20, 30 or 100, they're significant. You know, it's not just one person. So, you know, it's covered there. I'd just like to clarify, perhaps, Paul, that point that Councillor Watts mentioned there about if one person doesn't turn up. I've seen somewhere that if one speaker doesn't turn up, that somebody else can substitute for them. Is that?
If someone is a registered objector and they request to speak, and then for whatever reason, particularly illness these days, they are not able to attend, they can nominate someone to speak on their behalf, maybe read out a statement or whatever. But Councillor Watt's correct that if we get to a meeting and the speaker hasn't arrived, but there is another registered objector, and we know they're a registered objector who is there, who wishes to speak, then there would not be, I feel, any problem with allowing them to have that time. But once you agree to a person that they speak, as I say, if they can't make it, then they can get someone to substitute for them, whether it be husband, wife, whoever it might be, neighbour, whatever. I would normally allow that. That would be perfectly acceptable.
At the last school planning situation sort of played off, and someone's neighbour read out a statement on behalf of the community, and you know, people are sort of trying to make sure that someone is there speaking on behalf of them. Councillor Buckingham? Oh, sorry, was it Councillor Fenwick?
It's okay, you can go on. Just applying for those, yeah.
But that's not in the procedures, is it? Is that part, or could it be part of the procedures, or just making it known?
Well, we could certainly, we could could certainly consider that. I mean, I think the onus would be to get the person who's registered to speak to actually turn up and speak, which is the primary purpose. I don't know whether, you know, I mean, sometimes I think we have had rare occasions, not under this authority, where a member of the public is a registered objector may have asked their local councillor to speak, not as a councillor, but on the, you know, because they're obviously a bit more used to public speaking, etc., etc. I mean, we could work something in, but as I say, the primary task would be for the person who's registered to turn up. I would just, while I have the microphone, Chair, on the subject of pooling, I think that's very difficult sometimes. I think it's easy if you have a clearly defined single group who's organised and motivated the neighbourhood or the local community. And they perhaps can act in a coordinating role. I don't think it's really should fall on us as the primary body to try and get people together to you know, I think it's a very difficult thing for us to do, particularly in the timescales that we're talking about, because bearing in mind the agendas go out 5 clear working days. I think it's easier where you perhaps have more organised groups, because you know that they are speaking for a number of people. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got any better arguments than one person's got, but you know, so I don't want us to be slipping into sort of committing to doing that.
Thank you. Now can we go on to Councillor and then Councillor Watt?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to come back then, yeah, I mean, I was going to mention about sort of pooling resources, because I very much agree with efficiency with something that I've discussed at length and tried to figure my head around if we could actually do something like that to make it more efficient, because that would be ideal, wouldn't it? Like to pull the ideas together and the sort of material planning objections. However, it's just, yeah, like the timescales are very difficult. Some people don't necessarily always know what they're going to say, or they're quite new to speaking, so collaborating can be quite difficult there. Also, the sort of idea of repetition, if multiple people are coming forward with a material planning objection sort of on their own, I think that sort of also speaks to the weight of that objection. So it might actually be something valuable, even though they might be saying the same thing in different words. That might be something that we could consider as being useful. The idea of like significant being sort of a reasonable tipping point, for me, it being a subjective word, it's just not clearly enough defined. Like we need. I actually think the chair's discretion can work in conjunction with something like that. For instance, if I was saying about having more than 3 speakers, you allow 3. But then if you have sort of 5 people who want to speak, then the chair could allow that discretion and give people that voice. And definitely, if people can't speak, encouraging them to come along, brilliant idea, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think that's mainly the things I had to say sort of in response to that, but yeah.
Councillor Watt?
Quantity, again, back to it, you know, number of people objecting on the same matter. On planning committee, all it takes is one objector to have one relevant material consideration, and that is what can refuse an application. It just takes one, and it doesn't matter if there's 5 people on the same one or 5 people, 5 different ones. It just takes one, and if it's correct, committee members have the opportunity to make a decision on that. The other one was about pooling. I don't want, yeah, Paul's correct. We're not here to organise objections to applications. If there was some external mechanism that somebody could allow people to be sort of like a group together, then perhaps that somebody could set that up. Data protection, and then that comes into it, so it'd have to be like anonymised, but that's not something for us to organise. Thirdly, is that I think it's experience of one planning meeting we had where we had 3 objectors on the same application. We gave them 2 minutes each. The main objection on that application was not even a consideration of the application. It wasn't. The application was for an extension of a property. Their objection was on a HMO principle, and it was totally not material to the considerations. And we allowed 3, and we didn't know what they are. So there was 3 people who spoke on a material thing that wasn't even material to that. So that's what could happen. So that's my experience.
And you know, in planning, you know, all it takes is that it's just like what Councillor said, that getting that one sort of material matter addressed and then making sure that it's where. Does anyone else have any points of like to raise? No, shall we go to the recommendations? Oh, no, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I'm only just warming up, Chair. If it's okay with you, I'll take us through the remainder of the report. I'll try and be brief. Appendix B relates to the officer's scheme of delegation. There was some concern raised as part of discussions on planning about the inconsistency of approach in relation to how applications actually get onto an agenda. And this related to the way it worked with ward members, with town and parish councils, objectors and so on. And so what the Constitutional Working Group looked at was a way of trying, as best it could, to standardise the approach. And this, funnily enough, relates back to something that one of our speakers, Mr. Dixon, raised, and has been raised in the meeting, about the situation in Thrapston in particular, regarding the number of applications going through, which some of which really should not have found their way through to a committee without going through perhaps some more vigorous checks. So this isn't about quashing down in relation to material planning considerations. This is about ensuring that all applications where there is a request to refer to committee go through, if you like, a standardised approach that involves both members and planning officers before it gets to the agenda. And so to do that, we have to alter the scheme of delegation, and that's listed in Appendix B, which, as I say, we've tried to make as consistent for each approach as possible. And the third point, because there is another recommendation, is to reduce the actual quorum of the area planning committees, which currently sits at 5, so that's 5 members out of 9, and bring it down to 4, which is standard with many of the other committees that the council operate. And given its reduced numbers, obviously, you know, it makes more sense. And so that's the third recommendation. Talking as long as I can, but I'll stop now.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you. If we could put aside the quorum bit until afterwards, so we do one at a time. I was the person who pushed this forward because I felt it would help in circumstances such as Thrapston, where we were having things like wooden windows in a conservation area being called into committee. Just, you know, really tiny little applications. And when you've got lots and lots of small parish councils, they, you know, anything in the village is not acceptable usually. So that was it. And I think that bringing this in and this standardised system will help with things like the length of the committees, which in turn will help with giving the chair. I mean, if I've got, as a chair, if I had, you know, 10 applications in front of me, I would perhaps be a bit more known to have more speakers. If I've only got 5, then, you know, okay, then perhaps more substantive items, but you know, even just going through the normal procedure takes time. So the idea was to standardise it, and whereas for members, the procedure was that you had to go through chair and vice chair, to say that it could be called in. And I think, 9 times out of 10 it could be, allowed through anyway. But to standardise the other things like the town and parish councils in particular. The other thing that came up, and this is in the report, is a number of objections by members of the public. What the committee came down to was to increase it to 5 objectors for area committees and 10 strategic. So members may have a view on that, but it was to try and make sure that applications really needed to go to committee. And I'm very happy with that. Perhaps we can come back to the quorum one afterwards.
Thank you. Would anyone else like Councillor O'Dowd?
Thank you very much. So, just with regards to the number of objections, if we just pick off straight at that point, yeah, my concern is that this sort of refining it back, which will help very much so in Thrapston, where it is sort of where planning applications like that can be more contentious. It's just a case of, for a lot of other areas, I'm concerned that that threshold will then mean that a lot of other planning applications won't get the visibility in other areas. So that's my main concern there, especially because for a lot of, for the public, when these applications come to planning, that's where they get visibility of them, so, and that's when they get their chance to speak. So if it's, for Kettering, for instance, that would make it quite removed, and quite a lot of applications might not come forward. I also wanted to raise the point about strategic, and if we have had any applications come to strategic that didn't feel like they belonged there. That was sort of one question to raise there. I have a couple more points, but I think.
Thank you. Now, in response to what you said about the calling down Rob Harbour when he came to the proposed planning protocol, he done a lot of research about other unitaries across England, and his research sort of found that most unitaries, have a cap of about 15 to 20, much higher than what we have. We were on the lower end of the scale, and we want to sort of put ourselves in line with the sort of national image of that, and that's one of the reasons behind that move. Now, would anyone else like to? Councillor Watt?
I generally agree with the suggestions about these proposals.
Thank you.
Chair, I think there was, through the chair, I think it was an unanswered question that was asked about Strategic Planning Committee. I have to be honest, my knowledge of Strategic Planning Committee is not as great as it should be. But I think because it has various terms of reference to do with things such as waste management and so on, some things will automatically go to the committee or be under the committee's sway. It isn't so much about objections, I think, well, up to this point with strategic planning, who knows what the future holds. It's more to do with things that fall within their terms of reference that would automatically get referred to, I think. As I say, I don't want to be on record, I think I am saying that, but yeah, so I don't think it's the same issue with strategic planning. I'm sure in the future they will get their fair share of contentious applications.
That's the last.
Just one more thing. Impacted parties are sent letters, so they are, and there is the orange thing on the lamppost, so they would become aware on planning application that affected them, and allow them the opportunity to object.
Is there any more? Anybody else like to speak this? No? Now, shall we move on to the vote on the recommendations?
I think Councillor Watt.
Oh.
Councillor Mercer and I wanted to make a comment on quorum.
Yes, if we go on to that. At the Constitution Working Group, I disagree with everybody else. I'd suggested that we discuss it because I felt that some of the other committees at 4 were too low, and that the planning at 5 was just about right. Because I usually think that an odd number is better, as well as anything else. Because if you think about, let's say we have a chair plus 3 members, they are 4 people that are deciding sometimes, even quite large applications sometimes, and I think 4, to my mind, is not sufficient. I would say I would keep it at 5. I would have been happy if we'd moved up 5 for some of the others, but since they have a larger committee, say 13, it's not quite so likely that they'd get down to that sort of level. But with only 9, and sometimes 1 or 2 people might have a conflict of interest very often, where they've perhaps discussed it at a different council or they've been involved with it earlier. And then you only have to have 1 or 2 people, offset, and you can easily get down to 4 members. So personally, I would leave it at 5.
Councillor Watt.
I too share Councillor Mercer's concerns about going up for a feel a more than 50% attrition rate on a committee is excessive. If there was a very large public interest application forward to that committee, I wouldn't personally feel comfortable with less than 50% of the committee having deciding it. And if it was a 2-2, I wouldn't really want to use put in that position to use my casting vote. So I do not support that reduction myself.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? Councillor Pemberton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I actually agree. I think 4 is too low. We sort of want that version out tonight, aren't we? Yeah, I fully support your thoughts there.
Chair.
Now, is there anyone made their points about section C of recommendations?
So, well, yeah, sorry, Chair. I'm just going to come back. I mean, having 5 is fine, but you might get down to 4 if someone abstains. So
Abstention's still a vote.
But I would also point out, for reference, that of course all committees have substitute members, so the possibility of a meeting being inquorate is slim. And let's not forget, although this committee obviously has 5 at the moment, it is being expanded to 13 in overall membership, as was previously agreed. So. But obviously it's a matter for councillors. If the committee want to remove that recommendation and just stay with the status quo, then that's fine.
Well, in that sense, would anyone like to propose leaving that recommendation?
Are we taking these 3 separate items?
I think it's probably better to deal with them separated, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. I just had a couple of other notes that I realised I didn't mention about the first Appendix A, if that was okay. It was more to do with wording than anything, and also I would like to actually propose an amendment to make sure that we can allow for that definitive cut-off for third-party links. So one of the things in 2.10, one of the things as well, because this is guidance for the public, how we word it, I actually think is quite important. So the fact that we end 2.10 with you will not be able to add anything, I think is abrupt, to be honest with you, and I think it's not very politely worded. It's not very respectful and appreciative of their contribution. So I'd like to rephrase that and say he has to move back to the public gallery, if that would be alright. Also saying to ensure the smooth running of the meeting, I think at the start of that bit it's also not really needed, but I would probably remove. So in terms of the amendment then, I think, let me just go back to the section.
So we've got here one third party speaker for and one third party speaker against the proposal. I would say here that if we have more than three people registered to speak, that we allow 3, and then or actually 2, and I sort of open up to debate if you want to sort of amend that. But I think even adding 2 limits the repetition, the possible repetition. Obviously, we've sort of had suggestions of 3 tonight, so we could potentially do that too. But we need to have some sort of cut-off, and I won't be voting for this if we don't have something firm in there, basically.
Chair, can I just ask for clarification? So in relation to 2.3b, what would you actually want the wording to be?
So, one third party speaker for and one third party speaker against the proposal, and then you can say in brackets, if more than 3 speakers register, or more than 3 individuals register to speak, 3 speakers will be allowed, for and against.
For and against?
For and against. I mean, or 2 if we're sort of saying.
Yeah, this is why I want clarity. So,
yeah.
Are you suggesting that if there's more than 3 speakers vote for, you would say the chair should they should be allowed to speak? Sorry, if 3 speakers vote to object, they'd be allowed to speak.
They'd be allowed to speak.
Right, and if 3 people request to speak for, they'd be allowed to speak.
If 4 people are allowed, if 4 people register to speak, we have that cut off at 3, basically. It's like the first 3 people who register for allowed to speak.
Right, sorry, I apologise, Councillor.
Sorry,
It's because I'm old.
Becoming algebra.
Well, we can just say the first 3 people who register to speak, because I suppose that's basically what we're saying there.
So we're basically right. Tell me if I've got this wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if I'm doing that. So if up to 3 people
for or against may speak against the proposal.
For or against, no, sorry. If up to 3 people register to speak against the application, that should be allowed, yes?
Yeah.
And if, in addition, up to 3 people speak, sorry, did I say 4? You got me
confused me now. I think, like you say, I was sort of trying to say, like, if we get a significant amount of people registering to speak, that you allow speakers up to a cut-off point. That was sort of what I was getting at, but I don't know if it's just simpler to say a clear to put 2.
Are you suggesting a maximum amount of speakers of 6?
So we've already got 1 third party speaker for and 1 against. So we've already got 2 public speakers there. So yeah, I mean, I actually think at this stage, even just saying 2 for and against would be a show that we're allowing people that flexibility to come and speak. And then the chair can then utilise his discretion if we want to allow 3, for instance. But you then sort of have that cut off, and it's only adding, what, sort of 12? You're adding 6 minutes to that planning application, maximum.
So,
yeah.
So, just so I'm clear, so are you saying there should be 2 speaking slots for objectors
and against,
and 2 speaking slots for the applicant, agent, speaking for, and then anything after that, we go to the chair's discretion.
Yeah.
2 and 2.
So that's 2 and 2, instead of 1 and 1.
Yeah, instead of 1 and 1. So yeah.
Right, thank you.
Right. Thanks for clarifying.
Sorry, my mic's not working. So just on that, so are members agreed with the minor alterations that Councillor spoke about earlier on in terms of the public gallery and the other one where I take that out? So we'll consider with those ones.
Through the chair, I'm happy to reword that so it's more customer friendly.
Got some more wording bits, would that be better to say now?
Yeah.
I'll just read that because that's 3.1 as well, which again, I think we basically say halfway through, things you should not do, which I just think isn't particularly nice and good. So I think saying this, I'll send you the quote output, but the committee will only be able to take into account legal planning objections, so when speaking against an application, please be mindful of aspects which are not allowed to be considered. These can include private property rights, right to review, effects on property value, developers' motives, etc. To get a full view of the list of legal planning objections which may be considered, please see below. And then I would list those there because it's very, very clear then. And then this is also something that we can then send to people, like as suggested by Lynn. It's also advised that speakers be careful not to make personal slanderous comments, etc., and refer to sensitive personal information. Perfectly fine.
I can deal with that as a...
Yeah, I can send that to you as well.
I can do that.
Councillor Mercer?
Yeah, I just realised that what you should not do is one of the things that it says at C, make your comments about. So obviously that is just the wrong. It's indented incorrectly.
Indeed.
Yeah. I'm not really bothered about the change to that because I think it says what it needs to say. Personally, the other changes that whatever Councillor Federich said, I thought were quite reasonable.
I think what I was just going to get to was, I think those are minor alterations to the document. I think what we'll move into is an amendment to the recommendation, and then we'll need a seconder for that amendment, then we'll do a vote on the amendment. If it falls, then we go to the substantive. If not, then that will go through as substantive. So I think that's where we'll move to, but I think through you, Chair, you're still making minor amendments or we don't.
Now,
So we need a seconder of yours.
now we for seconder.
On the text.
This is on the amendment.
On the amendment.
So the amendments to 2 and 2,
Sorry.
which we just spoke about.
Sorry, through the chair, just so members are quite clear what they're voting for. It's the amendment that's been put forward that instead of having an automatic 1 for, 1 against, it's 2 for, 2 against. And I believe that's been seconded by Councillor Buckingham.
Correct.
Now, shall we move to a vote? All those in favour? And all those against? Thank you. And that motion is not carried. Now we move on to the independent review panel.
Chair, we need to go back to the substantive recommendation.
Yeah, so now, because the amendment fell, we then go back to the substantive motion that's contained within the recommendations. So, if I were you, Chair, I would take them not on block, so I would take them separately. So I would take a mover and a seconder, and then a vote on each of the separate items, so A, B and C.
Thank you very much. Now we'll begin with it. Now, do we have a proposer for A? Thank you. Councillor Watt, do you have a seconder? All those in favour? All those against?
I can't get me thing.
Yeah, it's noted, Councillor.
Thank you.
Now, go on to B. All those in favour? Can we get a proposer, please?
Chair, I'll propose the Appendix B, Officer Scheme of Delegation, as printed.
Now we'll a second. Thank you. All those in favour? All those against?
Yeah, one abstention.
One abstention. Thank you. Now we'll go to C. Can I have a proposer, please?
Chair, I'll withdraw that recommendation.
Oh, sure.
So who's the caller? Oh,
Yes, yes. Now, we go on to the
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, information was circulated to all 78 councillors in relation to the independent remuneration panel. I'm going to hate this one. Exercise that is underway. I don't really intend adding anything particularly to the report. I think it's fairly straightforward, and as I say, members would have seen the substantive appendices prior to this agenda issue anyway. So it was really just an opportunity for members to note the consultation exercise